Hello, and welcome back to another great edition of our Christian History Chronicles, where we at the Center for Christian History get to have even deeper, more robust dives into particular subjects that would have impacted different parts of Christian history. And we're excited today to have something unique and something that is not just so much super duper hardcore history as much as it is that would have such a fantastic historical impact and impact really throughout Christianity, and that is the writing is John Bunyan and his supreme epic, Pilgrim's Progress, and not just from a literary standpoint of kind of unpacking or a theological or a Christological impact or study on pilgrims, but how others were able to take that story and turn that into visual art that also ended up helping to tell that story. Does that sound maybe right, Dr. Duran? Have I gone way off crazy
No, you
land?
have
Okay.
you've got it exactly right.
Yay
And
for
that's
me.
what, yeah, the title, Global Bunyan and Visual Art, you got it all wrapped up in one.
All in one spot. Well, our
Yeah.
guest today is Dr. Angelica Duran, who is a professor at Purdue and teaches English and the Bible is literature and a host of other different courses. I'm ready to head up there right now and take a class. Okay, already just to be able to have you. But she is a co-editor on a myriad of books that really talk about artwork and talk about the art as it relates to particularly around greater Renaissance writers and others, maybe a little bit of time even after that. And she's our guest today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a book that's just really near and dear to my heart. So when you contacted me to say, "Do you want to talk about it?" You bet.
Right, right. Well, that's one of the cool things about any of us
Yeah.
that do these things. We love our babies, don't we? And we love
Uh-huh.
our babies that we love to be able to that we have nurtured and talked to and petted
Yeah.
all these times, and we
Yeah.
usually are pretty glad to know somebody else at least wants to hear what we have to, and not students who
Yeah.
have to hear it, but
Right.
people who want to be able to hear it. So that's
Right.
great. Well, Pilgrim's Progress, for those who may not have read it or may not
Hmm.
might I would assume probably have at least be familiar with it. Just the way that Bunyan has written this and his thought process of how he has written Pilgrims lends itself so much to visual. I know that the last time I read it, the first time whenever I read it, but I actually listened to it, an unabridged part on an audio book
Uh-huh.
on a long trip, okay,
Uh-huh.
to listen to. But it caused me to want to continue to visualize what Christiana looked like. What did
Yeah.
the wall look like that they were hopping over? Where was this
Uh-huh.
next character that they found? And it caused me to want to create and think about what those folks might have actually looked like. And so I guess that is that kind of the basis of where a lot of other illustrators maybe came from as well, that it just gives creativity if I'm an artist to be able to come up with any number of these characters.
I really think so. I mean, the characters are so rich and the set, what we call, the settings, but the places that they grow through, the Slough of Despond or Vanity Fair, they just mean so many things to so many people.
Mm.
And I think it really does come up. I assigned myself to write the chapter on stage performances that involve children.
Huh.
And, part of that, I think it really helped me dig back to when I was a kid or even, with my own children and grandchildren and seeing them put on and perform a work of art. Actually, just recently, I went to see my granddaughter's performance in a very abridged version of Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
Okay.
And Pilgrim's Progress, so many scenes were done for schools or the whole of Pilgrim's Progress. There was even a short opera on it.
Huh.
In Colorado, a youth dancing group put on a dancing version. Yeah, within the past couple decades,
Wow.
it's still very alive and thriving. But even, not, you don't have to have a whole performance or anything, but we do it in our minds, and that was one thing when, we were working with the publisher, the press, to say, oh, now that we've done one book, Global Milton and visual art, are we interested in doing another book? And immediately Bunyan came to mind. And I was
Mm,
wondering, where did I, first see illustrations of Pilgrim's Progress or any of Bunyan's other works? Because some of his other works are illustrated too, although they get short shrift in this book just because, his Pilgrim's Progress is by far the most popular. And I really think that it is that when I was young, I don't know if you know, the Harvard Classics, the 5 foot
sure.
shelf of Harvard Classics. And I
Yes.
actually have it here in my office. And in anticipation of this, I pulled out volume 17. Look at how well used
Wow.
this thing is. And um, they include, here it is, Harvard Classics, and they include an illustration of Greatheart, who shows
Ah,
up in part two, and
wow.
actually is a friend of Ready to Halt, who is someone who has a disability in walking, and Feeble Mind, someone with a cognitive disability. And these,
Right.
these folks are just working together to get to the celestial city. So I think it really does spark the visual imagination.
Well, when Pilgrims first came out, were there illustrations in it when it first was when it first was published, or was it
The
strictly just the
very,
text?
very first publication, and it's really hard to determine if there was a publication because sometimes people pull pictures out, right? So we do have some very old copies and they have no illustrations, but it could have been because
Okay.
they were pulled out. But, some very, very, at least within the first 2 years of its publication of part one, which focuses on the protagonist Christian, yes,
Hmm.
they had like, very few, 5, 7 illustrations. And then when part two came out, which features his wife Christiana, that one for sure came out with illustrations.
Huh.
Hmm.
So did other artists, I guess ideas of copyright and things like that that we would be concerned about today. That's my ignorance about how much publishers worried about that at any point in time, particularly you're going from the 1600s all the way up, about, but were there other artists that would just kind of take their own leeway on that and just decide that they wanted to go create artwork that had to do with pilgrims because it was such a popular
Yes.
book?
Yes, you're exactly right. Pilgrim's Progress came out before copyright. And we actually don't even know all the artists who drew those first
Oh,
illustrations.
really?
And it was it's not anything unusual for this book alone. Um, uh, Books that were illustrated during the Renaissance often, didn't have the I'm sorry, the artist's signature at the bottom of it that we're now used to seeing and everything else like that. And they didn't necessarily think of it as art, like on paintings at a museum or something like that
Mm,
either. And so, but yes, almost immediately, people started illustrating it, adapting it. William Blake, some very big artists. And we do have one chapter on William Blake's illustrations of Pilgrim's Progress. He didn't finish it. They're even unfinished. They're just gorgeous.
wow.
Yeah.
So were most of those artists, do you think, trying to uh, use their talents in creating the illustrations as a way of proselytizing and being able to talk more about Christianity, or was it just, hey, look, I'll do Dickens if it's going to make me some money, right? I mean, not Dickinson, right? I mean, but
Uh-huh.
if it means that I got to illustrate Macbeth, okay, it's popular. People are going to want to pay attention to it. I'll put it out there. Or were people thinking of this no more? I'm trying to, I really want to put this within the realm of Christianity and being able to tell the story of what it means to go through this, to be a pilgrim, right? To go through this
Right.
progress piece. Is it probably some of both?
It is a little bit of both. We don't have all of the sort of journals or diaries that tell us
Mm,
why certain artists elected on their own versus being recruited to do illustrations for books or museums or stained glass windows or other
ah,
things like that. But if I can just, give
Yes,
you, for
please.
example, a close-up, this is actually a detail from what's called the Pilgrim's Shield from one of the premier, or not one of the premier metal workers, Elkington and Company from Birmingham, UK in the 19th century. And they actually premiered that shield at the Paris Exposition. So it
Ah,
really was an artistic, a technological sort of statement that they were making. But, I mean, it does just show you too that the Christian text, Christian figures were every day and like they are even today part of the culture out there, and what are you going to do with it? What kind of
mm,
story are you going to tell about it? What kind of art are you going to produce from it? And I think some of the best art comes when people are enthusiastic about something. And
okay.
whether it's because they themselves are Christian or they respect the Christian stories and characters, I think that comes out. We have one chapter that deals a little bit with an opera by Ralph Vaughan Williams, who uh, his friends say that he wasn't Christian. But who really knows? I mean, that, we all go through our own journeys. And, when we're teenagers, we might say that, we are not believers, or that we're taking a pause. And others, have an enduring faith, that is
Hmm.
low key sometimes and, and takes up all their daylight hours other times. So, you never know. But the artworks are, to me, clearly showing that they were at least artistically inspired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but if I remember right, I mean, Bunyan was a congregationalist, I mean, a nonconformist, right? And
Uh-huh.
so spent a little time in the jailhouse somewhere along the way too, right? Just like Isaac Watts or Isaac Watts' father at least, and
Right.
others that during that time in Great Britain,
Right.
you were pushing the edge, right, to get out
Right.
there and start to do this kind of religious work outside of the approved OK Church of England structure.
Exactly. Although he, grew up and his spiritual autobiography, Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners, does talk about his state of disbelief when he was younger and his
Mm.
conversion process. Yeah, and certainly I still do remember reading that for the first time and just wondering, like, just be quiet. You know, just keep it to yourself. Or why are you not keeping it to yourself? But as I grew older, understanding how ethical stakes, that we believe in,
Mm.
whether we call that Christianity or just ethics, that he had a belief system and felt called, to say it and was going to say it, even though it meant him going to jail at a time that was a huge sacrifice to his family.
Mm.
And that his family stood by him too. There were so many illustrations that didn't make the book. The book has 132 illustrations in it, but there are just thousands of illustrations. And
I'm
some of
sure.
them are of his wife or his children visiting him in jail. So it's just part of, the story of someone like a Bunyan. So
Hmm.
most of the chapters do deal with Pilgrim's Progress. We try to refer to other ones of his works, like just now I mentioned Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners. There's the Holy War. Just he did write a lot. But we also focus on John Bunyan himself
Oh,
because
good.
people
Okay.
did, think about him and the narrator, that we call it for the Pilgrim's Progress is so closely aligned with Bunyan himself that, of course, we're going to weave him in, and just illustrators were fascinated by him as well.
Well, how many? I mean, if you got down to 132, okay,
Uh,
gee whiz. I
yeah.
mean, how many illustrations did you guys actually sort through before you figured out which ones you wanted to use?
You know, uh,
Spitball. It's not going to be on the final exam, don't
oh,
worry, but I'm just saying, I wonder.
I would actually say close to 500. Uh,
Wow.
Yeah, it really was a matter of that. And then, one illustration might have had to speak for a lot of the other illustrations. Like for my chapter on stage performances that involve children, there were just so many. But I didn't really know, what I wanted to emphasize. And then it turns out that my chapter only has one illustration.
Ah,
And I actually prepared a short PowerPoint just to
oh,
give
please. Yeah,
flavor
share it.
of things. So let me share it because it is there. Obviously it's my one of my favorites since I
Right.
included it. So let me just walk you through very, very, quickly so that we can continue just conversing. But first of all, even picking what's going to be on the cover. How do you
Hmm.
do that? And then so part of it is we did want to forefront the writers themselves. So there on the cover is a detail from the Pilgrim's Shield, made in Birmingham, UK, of what's called the Dreamer. And that's, often depicted as John Bunyan, because he, in famously at the start of Pilgrim's Progress, we have a dreamer who goes down to dream, and then comes the story of Christian. So, Global Bunyan Visual Art came out just a few weeks ago in hardback, and it will be coming back out in paperback, we're pretty sure. So, if it's a little bit too expensive now, although we tried to keep costs down, as I'll say in a minute, at least the paperback will be out, I think, pretty soon. And one of
Okay.
the ways we kept the price down is that the material or the paper copy has only grayscale figures because color illustrations cost more. So that was a hard decision because we have, for example, stained glass windows.
Mm.
And so, they don't come out as well. But anybody who buys the digital book, they'll get the color version of it. And then so Global Bunyan is the second of what turns out to be a series. The first book, I was again the lead editor, was called Global Milton and Visual Art. It came out in 2021, and that one had 103 figures, which was pretty darn good because that 2021, if you think back to then, the book was being put together during the pandemic. So getting all the permissions and the illustrations and other stuff was a little difficult. And what our recording here is the premiere of the mock-up for the cover of the next of the series coming out, Global Shakespeare
Oh,
and Visual
great.
Art. Yeah, so that's just a mock-up. That's not how exactly it will look. But you'll see that, for Global Bunyan, we have a shield. For Global Milton, we had some Renaissance watercolors. And for Global Shakespeare and Visual Art, they actually commissioned a Mexican artist to do that painting. So we'll read more about it when the book actually comes out, and it's scheduled to come out in 2027. So these
Fantastic.
Renaissance artists were, trying to show that they have sparked the imagination of so many artists. And so I'm just going to show you two or three more slides. One of them is from a chapter by Andrew McKendry on disability, illustrating disability in part two of the Pilgrim's Progress. And so the very first edition of part two did have illustrations. And here's the illustration of the Pilgrims, part of Christiana's group dancing at the beheaded head of giant despair. And the key figure is ready to halt. That's the character's name. And that means someone who limps. And then so you can see ready to halt right here. He has a
Hmm.
cane. That's from the very first edition of part two. And then up through the 19th century, you can see here he is. You can distinguish him from the rest of them because he has his
Hmm.
cane. And then here's another illustration of him with his compatriot feeble mind. And it's really just such an important chapter, as all of them are, but it really highlights how Bunyan represents anybody being able to have a fulfilling, ethical Christian journey, no matter their physical abilities. They travel along not just with Christiana and her group, but also here depicted in this final one with Greatheart. And a very robust guy, who fights the devil Apollyon. But here still is ready to halt with some of the other pilgrims
Uh-huh.
taking a rest as well. And then so the next slide, though, is it was really interesting as the chapters were coming in, trying to choose which illustrations to use. And one recurrent image throughout the illustrations, I just picked a few from chapters 2, 4, 7, and 16, is the fiend Apollyon, who, you read, okay, he has bat-like wings and he's very powerful. And Christian, the protagonist, is afraid of him. What does he look like? And so, here you have Apollyon done in statuary. You have it in book illustration. And this is the single illustration from my chapter that I was telling you about of a staged performance for children. And these are directions for angels' wings and for how to make Apollyon's wings.
Wow.
And that, like any child would know, it would be inscribed in them. Okay, Apollyon had bat-like wings, and this is how you wear them and such. And then
Isn't it
this one here is from William Blake, his version of Apollyon. And you'll notice, though, that in these illustrations, these first ones, Apollyon and Christian, when they battle, they're about the same size. But this Marvel version here, which is the last chapter, Apollyon is just this huge Marvel comic like character. And Christian there at the very bottom. But they have some things in mind, and it's just the way different artists represent fearful things,
Mm.
whether they're big or small, the same size as you or not, whatever. And then I think that's my last slide. So I just wanted to share with you a few of the images that people are in store with that we got to pick for this book.
Wow. What were there any particular artists around the time of Bunyan that really kind of latched on to Pilgrims or any of his other work and really want to do more and more as it came out or other books or that were they just probably individuals that were inspired in their own way whenever they wanted to be able to do some illustration.
Well, we do have, Bunyan's works shortly after his death, his collected works would come out. And then, you have a lot of illustrations of all the different works that he wrote. And even usually there's a biography before it. And so you'll have illustrations of him and his wife, his home, the church where he was a preacher, all those other sort of things that really bring it down to earth and
Hmm.
remind you that these are just individual writers during the Renaissance who just, as much as his evangelical work and one-on-one preaching with people, he had this aesthetic calling too,
Yeah.
and wrote and published and and was an immediate bestseller, very different from Milton and Paradise Lost, which, took, a little time to grow up to speed. It wasn't a bestseller, but Pilgrim's Progress was an immediate bestseller, which must have been just such a thrill for Bunyan. And he does write that in part two of Pilgrim's Progress. It's preceded by a short poem about, well, my last one has done so well, and you wanted more. And last time we left Christiana back at home, so here you're going to have her story.
Right. Well, how fun is that to do?
Yeah.
And I think part of that is the reason that it's been so impactful, and I don't even know sales wise or book wise where it is, other than to know it's way up at the top. Okay, that's kind of
Yes.
almost silly for me to say it that way, but other
Right.
than the Bible or other than maybe, you know, Ben-Hur or maybe, others like Uncle Tom's Cabin or,
Uh-huh.
but it makes the cut, right? In that super upper sphere
Right.
of books that way. It seems to me that anybody who is a pilgrim who is trying to progress in the way that they are, everybody has had at some point in time one of these characters either show up in front of you or go alongside you, or you might have been one for a
Yes.
time. So there's
Yes.
a relatability to a way that I might
Uh-huh.
not be able to think about different levels of hell in a way that I may or may
Uh-huh.
not be able to pull off. But I know what it's like to have,
Right.
despair hanging
Right.
around, right?
Uh-huh.
Or something like that. Do you
Right.
think that's maybe a part of what the connect is about that, about why the book did so well and why people might want to go eventually and illustrate that?
Well, I want to backtrack a little bit too. You're
Okay.
exactly right that it's hard to gauge these kinds of things,
Mm,
but for really all of the 18th century, maybe all of the 19th century, if people owned two books, one was definitely the Bible and the
hmm.
other one was Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
mean, more than Uncle Tom's Cabin or other bestsellers. Those would be the two books that they knew. So it really is it is interesting to me though, and this goes to how to answer your second question
Mm,
about what makes it so interesting is that I've always taught both part one and part two of the Pilgrim's Progress, even on a packed syllabus in my British Survey course, my early British Survey course. And more and more I notice I'm introducing people entirely to Bunyan, entirely to the Pilgrim's Progress. So it
wow.
really has fallen off, at least in the US, to, the assumption that I used to be able to make that people have read actually either the Bible or Pilgrim's Progress. But, once I help them through the difficulty of Renaissance English,
Right.
that's it, the vocabulary and all that other sort of stuff. Once they start getting into the groove,
Mm,
it really is those, just how everyday those
mm.
characters are. Where, when you were talking, I was thinking of Mr. Worldly Wise Man,
Okay.
and now we've bumped into them, and, they don't seem to be saying anything wrong, but then, they help the less positive parts of ourselves come out. But it also gives us an opportunity to champion ourselves,
Mm,
to, recognize that, these little moments of shame, that Christian or Christiana go through. It's like, oh, that's just part of everyday life. You
uh,
take it seriously, and then you get past it.
mm,
And then we have characters like Mr. Greatheart, right? I mean, he's the one who does battle and wins and helps Christiana's groups go through. But yeah, and we all want these Mr. Great Hearts around when things are going wrong. But he has a great heart. That's what helps him, be so vigilant, be so alert, do all the things he needs to do so he can be that character. And it's a really neat little moment in part two when he gets to meet Mr. Valiant.
mm.
Another warrior, because so far he's been the only warrior with this group and must feel a lot of responsibility. And there's this little scene that Bunyan depicts of just how happy Greatheart is, to finally have someone kind of like him, to be, maybe a closer sort of companion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, his ability, Bunyan's ability to be able to understand you know, a, the nature of humans,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And understand all those different feelings and
Yes.
experiences that people have had and say, you know, you're not out of the norm, right? There are
Right.
other people that have felt and wished that there was a great heart that was, next to them as well too.
Uh-huh.
I
Hmm.
mean, I think that when you bundle all of that up, not only because of the impact of that, it would seem to me that because people would have had some of those same feelings, and it's such a vivid picture that
Yeah.
illustrating those things, you probably didn't have to go too far in people's minds to be able to connect a dot, go, I see what that's like.
Yeah.
Okay. I can see what that means. We killed this, this beast, right? And
Right.
so it's not like if you told me to go figure out exactly what, you know, a dragon look like, and some, unless you it was described to me specifically, we might all come up with some other different idea in our head, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
despair, we know what despair might look like, and being
Yeah.
able to identify part of that, which kind of goes back to this whole reason of why there's all these illustrations.
Yeah, yeah. And let me, actually while you were talking, I'm gonna share just one more.
Oh, good.
This is a illustration that I show like in my PowerPoints in class. I whenever I teach a course, maybe that's why I got so interested in doing these books, is that in my courses, I really like, showing pictures.
Hmm.
Like Alice in Wonderland. But,
Right.
for example, here we have a children's, all of these are from the three chapters on children's version. And here's Christian, at the very bottom, Christian and his companion Faithful in Vanity Fair. And so, you have, I think that even the illustrations, if maybe you're nodding off and not reading as attentively and you come upon this illustration, it does remind you of all the noises and all the different kinds of people. And
Hmm.
that when you go in a crowd, there's both the joy of being in the midst of things, but also the sort of precaution and the noisiness and everything else like that. So it really brings that sort of thing out. And the second illustration there is of another children's versions. And there are, just sad moments. Not bang them up. People are going to be dying because aliens are coming down. But, death is just a part of everyday life.
Hmm.
And so there you have, someone watching in on a deathbed scene. Yeah, and I think it's gentle, but honest with children. Who
Right.
they have pets who die, and family members who die, and not sugarcoating it, but being as compassionate as you can. But then that third image there, that's also of a Vanity Fair. That is artwork. Like when you were asking earlier, do you think that the illustrators themselves are brought by a Christian sort of evangelical
Hmm.
feeling, and you know, whether or not they are, that illustration in a children's version, I think really would make them think, about like, wow, people used to think that those kinds of wigs and those kinds of hats and those black moles, on,
Right.
mooches, were so attractive. And here today, am I doing things with my hair or my clothing or whatever that, are equally a little Vanity Fairish, sort of thing. And then updating it, that illustrated version on the very top, you can see two characters. The one who's in sepia color is that version's Christian with the famous burden on his back. And just these
Mm.
little details, because you can see the cross, the crucifix on top of that burden, right? And
Oh, yes. Now
there's
that you
there's
pointed
these
out.
little clues that they give you, and I don't know. I mean, also this little thing. Another detail is there's a little snail near the two shoes, and this idea of carrying your house with you, and that it might be slow going. That really just give you ideas about I might not be fast as everybody else, or as luxurious as everybody else at Vanity Fair, but I'll get my stuff done. And then finally, the illustration on the bottom is actually from a children's version from Mexico.
Ah,
And you can in part tell that again through the details because above the archway, it's Spanish, llamad y se os abrirá, call and the door will be opened. And so, for someone who doesn't know Spanish, it might, uh, ask, move you to enter into conversation about, oh, what does that mean? With, a Spanish speaking friend or whatever. And, you can then start talking about little biblical inscriptions here and there. So, these children's versions do a lot. And I was really glad that three of the 16 chapters we could feature it because, it was not a children's version at all.
mm.
And that's, I think, why it has been adapted. for children. Again, it is Renaissance English. Thank goodness, they still teach Shakespeare because that's one way to get people sort of used to reading Pilgrim's Progress because they're kind of used to a little bit of that discomfort reading Renaissance English.
Right,
But then
right,
again, the story, I think, really
right.
draws people in.
Right. Once they get beyond the thys and the thous and the others and the
Yeah,
these,
yeah,
the long V's, right?
yeah,
Then they might be able to pull that together.
yeah.
Fantastic. Well, tell us how do folks find the book who would like to be able to not only this but also maybe
Uh,
previously in the other part of the series that is there with Milton. How do we find this and get a
well,
hold of it?
one thing that we really worked on, and that's why we're so glad that Global Milton and Visual Art did well, is although we learned some stuff with that one too,
I'm sure.
is that we really tried to keep the wording just very conversational.
Mm,
So, when I, as a scholar, am talking to other scholars about research findings or whatever, I do use the vocabulary. So, that's just like a doctor would use, medical terms when talking to a nurse or a doctor or stuff.
sure.
But, we really tapped into ourselves as just, readers of books, not necessarily instructors of books.
Mm,
And so it was very conversational. The one thing we did learn from Global Milton is that one did have or does have color images, and so it does cost more. And that's why we made the decision with Global Bunyan and with Global Shakespeare, it's going to be black and white or grayscale images, except for the digital versions, which are in color. And like I said, we are pretty sure that Global Bunyan is going to come out in paperback, so making it even less expensive. But you can buy it anywhere. It is published by Bloomsbury. And what I will try to do with them is reach out to them and ask them if they, have any discounts for
yeah.
your watchers for a
Well,
certain
thank you.
date. You can put only good through, whatever
We'll take
date.
it.
And or you can just even buy it at Amazon or order it from your local bookstore. And then they'll get it, and hopefully you can enjoy it. I mean, it really does have just very enjoyable pictures. One chapter is about Welsh translations.
Mm,
Another one is on stained glass windows. And then there's the one I think it's going to be a favorite. It only came out a few months ago, but I think a favorite is going to be the Marvel Comics
sure.
chapter. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, people might not have even connected those dots that there would have
yeah,
been such a thing, right?
yeah,
Just to be able to have seen it part of that way. So
yeah, yeah.
that's fantastic. Well, hey, we have enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Angelica Duran, who is giving us great info and helping us to see some different component pieces about how impactful books like Pilgrim's Progress is not only being seen as a theological and a doctrinal and a how to do the Christian walk version, which is certainly what made it so popular, but also this other layer that comes in through these illustrations to know that
Yeah.
others have throughout the decades and the centuries have been able to see this same thing and it touched them in that way that they wanted to be able to illustrate it. And so, how grateful we are that you and your colleagues have put together things like that for us to be able to learn more about it. So, thank you. Thanks for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much to you, Nick.
All right. Take care.